Hi, I'm Seamless, and for a while it's still going to be Wednesday, which means I had time to actually do the viewer track review video. Yeah! Anyway, if you'd like to have one of your pieces of track featured in one of these videos, head on over to the Discord channel that's linked in the description of this video, where there is a submission channel that's just for this, from which I choose randomly which ones go where when, and today we're beginning with Construct by ZetaSphere. Let's see how this goes. Indeed. That was all very good. It was Cohen soundy as heck, and acai as heck, all at once. This pretty much nailed all the right bits. It had like, oh boy, like I'm really reaching to find some like nitpicks to pick at this, because like let me be perfectly honest. When I first heard one of the main Cohen soundtracks, that it was Meanwhile in the Future. That was one of the first times I'd heard that kind of sound design used in a context that wasn't a drum and bass track. And on top of that, it was also just expertly played with. Very planned, very put together. And it's what made me sort of understand that it was possible to even do that. Since my understanding of the technique of doing this sort of thing, and while it kind of still is a technique, it could be expanded to think of it more than just this kind of random creation process, but also the sort of intentional like phrase creation. And you do it right when you can just let your bass phrase play essentially by itself and it still works, because that's how smooth and good a groove it is. Like that, I would have been just as mad at this if I had heard this in like, I don't know, whenever that song came out, 2008, 9. Whoa, it must have been later than that. Jeez. When did that song come out? Point is that I couldn't do that back then, and it made me mad. So this would have triggered me just as hard. So that's pretty great. Like, I could wax about some mixing stuff about this, but genuinely, like, it doesn't matter anymore. Like, I've heard a lot of your stuff now at this point, and I can safely say that you know what you're doing. So good job, man. Coming up next, we have The Calm Before by AeixO, AEIXO, a capital O. I wonder if the O is silent. Coming up, let's hear it. AeixO. No, in the time. And hit play. So what I primarily enjoyed about this track was a lot of its textural applications. Primarily, once this stuff started kicking in right around here, like this was really fun, and it actually helped me to understand a few things. Let's listen to it again so we get that in our heads. You bet where I'm going to go with this. Some of you are probably familiar at this point with my distaste for water-based sound effects, and I I never really questioned why I didn't like it. I just sort of assumed it was a universal thing until I heard this, because you know what? I don't hate it. And yeah, it's not really explicitly water. It's more like this just kind of noise that's timed with enough things. It's in a particular frequency that's close enough to what we understand that particular effect to be. That's what it triggers my brain, at least, to sort of understand it as. But you can hear it by itself later. It's pretty clear by itself. But the point I'm making is that, like, the reason I don't like regular water effects is not because of any kind of watery nature, but because it doesn't have this. Because it doesn't have this high frequency blanket. And it kind of needs it. The reason why is looking at some of this stuff. It's a little bit like the intersample peaking discussion, but not quite. This little curve, like little room here in the oscillation, if you wanted to fill that in there with something that's higher frequency, it's not really about the sample rate. It's just about a tonality, a texture. Water stuff and watery nonsense like that is pretty high frequency, but isn't it interesting that when we describe the lo-fi effect of MP3 compression that kind of destabilizes and crunches down on high frequencies, that darkens it and messes it up, we call that watery. And it's because water as a physical object is low frequency. It's not very high energy, so it's round and smooth and soft and that kind of thing. Well, not really soft. Soft is something different. But point is it doesn't have high frequency definition. So when you hear a watery kind of thing, it's a little bit like hearing a formanty bass patch that has no top end to it, no top end filler like blanket of thing that balances out the textural presence. Now, with bass stuff, that's pretty easy. Just, distort some things, higher layers, neat. Noise, also neat. But with high frequency stuff, the problem becomes that how high frequency the filler has to be is particularly high. And why this section works out so well, the way it does, is because that pillow of energy was there at the right levels, at the right frequencies. And it was there to let those really loud, high tingy bits of things have their very clean presence, but also not be so dynamically far away from silence that it like pings us, which is, in my opinion, what that lo-fi experience is as a thing. So, like, most of the other times when we hear sort of watery effects, it's a bit like that formative bass experience where we just kind of like how cool it sounds, because it's not like a basic, normal, single voice focused, no air, no wind, no presence bass. Doesn't sound cool. A lot of the basses that inspired us to do a lot of these kinds of things sound just like that. And it's just that when you don't want to do that, you want to try and be intentional about what it is you're missing. And what you're missing is the in-between bits that can only be filled by something that's fast enough to fit in between them, which is going to be something noisy and high energy. But this track, excellent. All right. So I didn't totally jive with this last bit. And the reason why is because this switch up was cool, this first one, and it was slow and sparse enough that the way the mix in this track worked for it, worked. Versus this guy was too fast with too many kicks and like quickly on each other to the point where the way you had your mix balanced didn't account for how fast this was. And it caused it to really feel like out of place. This switch up didn't feel out of place. It's entirely because of how much space there is between hits. You can still do this. You just have to have specialized timings for things or specialized content for this section. Specialized versions of stuff for this section. Like, there's a lot of ways to approach it, but the point is that you need that. That's what you need to change. A big part of why I'm a fan of automating a lot of your primary like compression stuff around drums is that when you do this kind of thing, you just play them more, play them faster. They automatically adhere, as opposed to having to live with things like, as well, how long this sample is sounds a way that feels good, but part of what that thing is that feels good is its distance away from the other ones and how much longer they take to terminate. because when you get this close to each other and the math doesn't work out for them to be a perfect beat, you can feel it. Or if it comes out to be a triplet, you can feel that too. And it really screws with the mix for power reasons, but also our heads for rhythmic reasons. Yeah. Good stuff though on just about area of the front, melodic and textural. ZetaSphere's track had that going on for it too. It was almost like a offhand thing to comment, but the melodic stuff on that track was also very high tier. People are doing pretty good with that stuff lately. Coming up next, we have Burn by Elija Mergold. I'm only laughing because I think I know what this sounds like, and the contrast will be interesting. Coming up though. that was a trip. Wow. Okay. Um, this sounds exactly like how stuff I used to make. Yeah, sounded when I tried to do this. And I can give you pretty much every piece of advice I have learned since then to make what I imagine is the target. There's a lot of possibilities of what could be the target, but frankly, the advice is pretty much all the same. And all the things that would be different are mostly just choices on your part. So let's talk about what's going on. All right. So we mentioned kick timing and kick length in the other track, and the part where you can't even like detect where the kick is in here is a pretty good example. Like this is almost a saw wave in speed. Now, the best this depends on a bit on your output. There's a bunch of types we can consider. My main study for like nailing the orchestra metal balance is Rhapsody, formerly known as Rhapsody of Fire, and their album Triumph or Agony. It's like, and the song Triumph or Agony. It's like the best thing ever. Plenty of more modern works have happened and been done that do sound slightly more like kind of up to date. And then there's the Mick Gordon stuff, which is just like super modern and crazy cool and loud and nice. Now, the different requirements of them are not even necessarily about how realistic they sound, but just what kind of realistic they sound. Another study I had was, I don't know the name of the orchestra that played the One Winged Angel modern metal version for the Advent Children movie. That that was really sick. No, but that's an interesting. I'm putting this on a side note because it and the Triumph or Agony song are mixed a little bit differently, and they're both mixed a bit differently from how the way the modern stuff would be, and not even the modern loud stuff, because the modern loud stuff, all that stuff was they were made in the time and in a way to or to match away from a time where they just couldn't be that loud, so they dealt with things by just like, I'm not even sure there was a bass player in the Advent Children song. There probably was though, and there definitely was in the Triumph or Agony album, but it's just not very present. And that's just a power consideration, a mixing like concession. And then the modern stuff, the Mick Gordon stuff, uses a lot of cool tricks. I mean, I'm calling it that him, but like a lot of the people that pioneered it, like, you know, Meshuggah and Periphery and the like, they you know, are pretty, you know, pretty surgical about it the way that regular EDM artists are. They use sidechaining and they carve up all the stuff to be really loud so they can actually have all the way they do. But there's a threshold of too much of that where it starts to sound weird. And ultimately, especially when I try to do this kind of thing, the thing that I wanted to feel out of it the most was that it didn't feel fake. Not even that it didn't feel unrealistic, because there are plenty of other bands like Dream Theater and like that whole side of thing. Seventh Summit. It was an example of band gaming when I was recording them once, but they had this very sort of symphonic metal angle, but exclusively like 80s keyboard orchestra sounds, like not good orchestra samples, but they were mixed and layered and written within such a way that it just is what the sound was. It worked out, right? Now that, how does that sound more real than this, which actually does have pretty good sounding orchestra stuff? Like, what is it about the two of them that are different? And primarily the difference is just recognizing the limitations and power the source material has. Like, if you were going to try and do orchestra metal stuff, then you have to make things sound like there's an orchestra and a metal band. All of those different examples I gave you are differing levels of like, where is the metal band, where is the orchestra? So in the example of the Advent Children one, the orchestra and the metal band were just on the same stage together, more or less. That might have been how they recorded that, but if they didn't, that was how they wanted it to sound, as though they did. Triumph or Agony was very much more like there's an orchestra happening like in the background of this also metal recording, which is a bit different. And then the Mick Gordon stuff is very, everything is happening in a level and exact position and place and time that I want it to happen at the right level amount as I want it to happen, and then for no other reason or consideration. And it still though had, like, you heard the choir and sort of stringy elements that came in and they were distorted and messed with and needed, but they felt right. And what it is about that they made, what that makes it feel right is that it's the relative power difference. Like, despite the fact that you can make strings louder than guitars and drums, they don't feel right when they are, because it's one of the defining characteristics that they're not. And that seems like a strange thing to say, to be like, oh, well, did we just think of violins as being quiet forever? like the, there's only so many things that are different from what one sound is from another. You look at what a harmonics list is on on the like a violin, on a piano, on a brass instrument, just a saw wave. You notice it doesn't have all the same series. It's just different levels of the order that makes it a thing that's different. And then from that, the other difference is just like how long does it take them to come on? How loud are they relative to each other? Like a whisper that's really loud sounds really unnatural, and yelling that's really quiet sounds really unnatural. This is just another example of that. Um, we can't really make an orchestra be loud without it feeling weird. If our goal is not to make it feel weird, then we have to sort of place it in a way that sort of presents correctly. And the same thing with the rest of the stuff. And fortunately for you, the first easiest step to get there is to get real good at high passing stuff. Even in Metal Land, like the only things that need to have actual bass frequencies are actual bass instruments, which are the kick drum, the lowest tom drum, and the bass guitar. Nothing else needs to be down there or generating frequencies even related to it. Like all of this is unnecessary jank that's messing with your steez. Um, up in other lands, like we mentioned timing on certain other things. I think this is where that fill was. I wanted to hear again. I'll play it again. Here it comes. I mean, there was compression problems this whole time, but I just wanted to very quickly demonstrate precisely the actual problem. I'm trying to find this one specific tom fill. It was really quick too. That might have been it, but this is a good one anyway. You can kind of see how there's a level of a thing, and then how the level gets kind of pushed down by how loud the drums are. And this is a demonstration of what overcompression is. It's not so much that you compressed a lot and then that the amount you compressed was too much. It's that elements that did not need to get brought down got brought down, or at least in ways that were perceived to be bad. That's what overcompression is. Then there's sort of speed considerations, and you can kind of solve overcompression by considering its speed. Like, for example, the effect of where this needs to be the most heard is right here. Everything after this is kind of fun texture, but not super needed. And also how long these samples are could probably be curtailed. Even in real life drummer land, there's this stuff called moon gel. That's just this cube of sticky gel that you slap on your tom drums to mute the crap out of them, so that your crazy fast toms can be as isolated as possible because they don't vibrate. Like a lot about metal is like that because that's how fast stuff is. Even in the real life, it's about consideration for the speed. But because of that, you want to have your compression at a speed that means that it'll correctly come back up and be done when it's not in the middle of dealing with this. Unlike EDM, unless you're doing sort of the various most modern versions of this, you don't really want it to be noticed or heard that you did this sidechaining. You want it to be the kind of sleight of hand type, where it's really the exact size and shape of the material coming in at the power it comes in, so that it sounds like the two things were just merged together perfectly. That's the goal we want. And it's easier to do that when A, all your stuff's high passed correctly, there's not a lot of competition, and B, you actually get the speed consideration. Remember, I'm giving you all this advice that I didn't have when I was at this level myself. I struggled with that particular one pretty much until modern times. Like, and really, honestly, truly, only a few years ago, like I eventually started to feel where the wrong choices were, but I still didn't really get it. I have become the one who gets it, but definitely didn't get it when I was at this level. And it's a very important kind of thing because you do get a lot about like the music is pretty on. You know when things are supposed to happen. You know what riffs are. You know what the beats are supposed to be. You probably also know that you should probably write more variations. I don't know how far down in the writing process this track is, or even like how much of a demo it is, but the thing that got me, there was two things that got said to me as reactions to things I've made that made me really reconsider how I wrote music. The first one was someone reacting to this like orchestra electronic thing I made that was like 11 minutes long that had this oboe section doing this thing that was like the same thing the whole time. And they pointed it out being like, wow, I'd be really annoyed if I was the oboe player playing this part. Now, This is important because I'd been in a band by this point. I don't mean like a garage band. I was in an orchestra in my school, like, and this is stupid middle school orchestra still. But the point is it was still very like I all of a sudden was that bassoon player, and I realized, oh my god, like I know that like this stuff is fake, but part of like the quote unquote why does this sound wrong, why does it sound real part is there's a lot of what we understand the realness to be that's from the part where it's expected that a person is playing these parts, not even that a person did, but just that there would be, best case scenario, like I'm sure Rhapsody doesn't travel every single show with an entire ass orchestra, but best case scenario, there's people who are going to play those parts, and they're prepared for that. To that end, it made me really be like, okay, there needs to be some kind of variation in there every once in a while. And then the other part that I got that was said to me was a reaction to a song that was kind of like this, and I had I think I had a guitar for a whole like 3 months at this point, and before that I had tried a lot to fake guitar, and eventually gave up. I accepted that I was going to need a guitar, and but I was still writing stuff and I was using a real guitar, and like I had the sound and all that, and then the person that triggered me said that this sounds good now. It just sounds like this guitar part was written by a keyboardist, and like I knew exactly what he meant, which was that the things that I was writing were not inspired by the form factor of a guitar. They were inspired by what I thought notes sounded good. And like, yeah, it's not like you needed to do either way, but when you start to when you start to actually play a guitar, you start to notice that like certain really clearly obvious, even like for a piano player, it's hard to ever even think about this because no note is too far away for you to just play a thing, or in too awkward a position for you to just also play it. You have 10 fingers, it could be anywhere. But on a guitar, it is a whole different story. And like seemingly really clearly easy just scales and strange things in strange directions could be just wholesale impossible for guitarists to play. And it's not that they won't try or that you can't edit it to sound that way, but when you get to that kind of, oh, why does this sound weird stage? That's one of the reasons it sounds weird, because your whole experience of what you understood guitar parts to be have never been written this way, or except, well, they have by people who write like this, but it's not the most frequent type. And the most frequent type is the one where it's written by guitarists. So it's not, I'm not saying like oh God, you need to learn guitar, but you need to like spend a second or two considering the perspective of your hypothetical instrumentalists. And even like, yeah, you already know the best case scenario is to go in there like moment by moment, measure by measure, note by note, and like sculpt this. Because every version of this you've ever heard that really worked does that, doesn't it? But this is one good way to kind of jumpstart that at a kind of bare minimum. Is just to be like, this is based on stuff that was made by people who played it, and therefore was written for the assumption that it was going to be played by people. Yeah, probably got that far though. But yeah, like the mix is, and the just the barest variations are the two things you really need to change about this. Quite major things, obviously, but that's like you've got everything else down. Like this would be a solid thing. It's pretty sweet. That was a long-winded thing. I hope that helped. Coming on up next, we have Unnamed with Mind Games. That looks expressive. Let's have a look. Let's note the time. That was scrubby, wasn't it? That like it scrubbed. It was still going. It even visually did it. You can look at all this cross hatching going on. Like that was this was a fun effect of a track all the way through. Very loud, very high in the hit. This would go down fine in any big old dubstep thing, any big old dubstep playlist or mix. Like, damn. I can't really criticize a person for choosing to do this when it's what, like, the whole, like, this is the exemplar of every piece of the genre. So good job. And like, this was a very unique and interesting take. And what's also interesting about it is it has a dancey kind of flair to it that doesn't sound typical. I don't mean that just it has a rhythm that's weird. Like, it has a fairly kind of, like, you can see that if you think of the fairly typical kind of like trap, like Arabic sounding style thing, it would fit strategically and sectionally in here like this, but it wouldn't. I mean, this isn't that at all. And that's my point. It's not that, and it's not a lot of the other more typical like trance anthems or any of that stuff. And it still has a groove and like a dancey, like call and response text to it, and that's nice. Like, we should be applauding our experimentation into new kinds of that, because it's not like it's not cool, right? We need new of it. Right. Good job, Unnamed. You're gonna have a hard time if you actually like choose it to be your name. Chara with hour 72. Chara, Kahara, Sihara, Sarah. Sure. Hour 72 though. Coming up, here it goes.
slick ending. This is a slick track. Like, wow. I was about to have some nitpicks about how this intro went, but then it went awesome into the main thing, and then everything else just progressed beautifully. So every single piece of chosen moment in this track is great. But I like the big hole in the 500 hertz is killing me. It's such a deep cut, and this top bit is so loud, and that's the only thing bringing us down for me. This will probably sound great in a big system as well, but a bit too high on the high. And the only reason why this kind of thing would fly is because too many people have hearing damage. But like, if we were to observe the scopes, which we can't because the next update isn't the FL I'm running this on. Boy, that'll be great when that update comes out for this. Let me tell you what. But point is that if actually I'll just you can see, this is the most exemplar bit. Saying that word a lot. This is just how much of a hole there is in here. Like, this is where that snare lives, kind of on the top end and the bottom end of the kick. And like, mixing wise is a cool idea. In fact, you could even keep this hole as deep as it is. Just not while this has the height it does. It just, if it fills with the presence more than it should, in my opinion, unless a person has really good sub presence. I want to point out that I don't. But other than that, though, like, the music is beautiful, the timing is perfect, the arrangement is great, like, the choices are all awesome. Such a good track. Dang. Good job. Pretty much all around. Like, you could even, if you wanted to tell me that hole was like, and that how high the highs are, like, this is how you want to be, like, I can't really say anything about that. Like, it's not like it's gonna hurt too much, like, your chances of being successful about it. Anyway, up next we have Adjustment 2020 by I want to say Face, F-A-I-C. It really seems like how that's supposed to go. Because otherwise it's what? Evilfaic? Evilfaic? That could be it. Please tell me. In the comments. Yeah, engagement. Also, information. Anyway, also how this sounds. Nice. So gotta love that hardware resampling. That is a distinctive look and a waveform. Like I don't even have to ask. Like that's what that looks like. Isn't that interesting how that comes out like that? Like just normal. This is that normal like phase cancellation tear you see when you detune two saws. Only because Harmer's doing it. This is what it looks like. Like it's just very that. You used a bunch of them in here, and I dug them. Like I dug that. That's how you do that. Like yes. So this track this is like the exact opposite to me of the previous track. Not that it's bad, but that it has pretty much the texture I wanted in that previous track, but it doesn't have the arrangement depth it needs. And I actually kind of get also something a perspective that I used to get a bunch when I was new, and I would get to this level and I would make something like this and I would put it out into someone, and I would get a response that's people telling me that it was a good start, that it was like, oh yeah, this is a good beginning of a track. Like, it was really fleshed out, and I had no idea what they were talking about. What more fleshing could there be? Everything is happening. Every part is here. All the parts make it longer. Like sure, but what? Like a voice? Like I mean, yeah, vocals make everything fuller, but come on. No. What they're talking about was like that previous track. That previous track had the quality that I've come to describe as detail on detail. And here's a good example of not that. Of like you have their two separate bits that you're kind of fading out. How you're doing the call and response thing, like you should. But that's too much dead air. That's way too much dead air. And kind of you also sort of nailed that a bit in the end. And then kind of in the beginning, like this bit I kind of was making fun of it a bit earlier when I was like, "Mwah." And because it's sort of a funny sound and it's fun enough on its own, but not for this long. Then it became a problem, and the problem that it became was like you could still have this as the content that you have, but it just can't be this long in the tooth. Like you just have it length, and then go into whatever. And same thing with the rest of it, whatever. So, but like the question of though, like what do you do to fill the space up? It's not about putting more things in and having more stuff do more things. It's about having the things you have stuff happening on them. So like that track we just listened to was a good one, but also the track a few tracks back that had that watery effect that I was liking. This is an example of the watery effect that I don't like, where because there's no sort of like blanket on the top of it, it feels like it's sort of dark, muddy, rounded, and kind of just meh. And this is a low enough frequency that's not like offensive, but like this is the effect that's happening. And the way there's a billion ways to deal with it, but like the idea is that you want to have that kind of envelope of stuff on stuff. And they're like you do kind of do some of it at some points, and the main bits are pretty fine. Like the main actual role of what this is great. Like this actually has the mixed texture of a thing that I would call great, but only for the bits that are like built like that, and the rest of the in between bits are full of just kind of just like expected, not much. And I don't know actually what state of track this is for all I know this is a whip, but like I'm bringing up the whole like good start thing because I legitimately couldn't get it when I was at the stage. I was just kind of like, no, this is a done track. This is full. This is doing every single thing. I hit the checkboxes, and I literally can't imagine a version of this that has more going on that I wouldn't think was too busy. And like, didn't really have a way around that, to be perfectly honest. Like, I just kind of got better at generating individual things that would eventually, like, from their own generation, have the detail on detail that would satisfy still with the same number of stuff. Like, imagine if you played this, but enough of the alternative junk came out with it that it just became what you needed. Like that's sort of a big reason I spurred in that direction, because I did really just want to be like, here's the bass instrument, here's the instrument, because I'm from bands and that's how I like to think. But that kind of thought process really hinders you when you're trying to do stuff like that previous track. Because that's not That's not a thing that's like about trying to sound realistic or trying to sound natural or as a result of naturality that was because of music written intended for people to play. None of that exists. So a lot of choices don't need to be like about a length of time served to existing and certain things being the glory of themselves. Like you don't have there's no WEP player to satisfy. Just let the WEPs be WEPs. But yeah, the mix on this was great. This is the exact example of like if that previous track had this mix, that previous track would have been like my new favorite track. Yep. Okay. Coming up next, we have ATUR, ATUR, with Elixier. Not Elixir, spelled Elixiir, but Elixier, Elixier, which makes me think it's not the elixir, it's the elixir. It's more elixir than an elixir. It's Elixier. Or maybe it's elixir in a typo, or maybe it's elixir spelled funny. I honestly like not knowing the answers to these questions. It's good, because it's just fun to trying to do stuff, but it's also a good just kind of like you're getting a good idea what a person's reaction is gonna be to this when they come into it cold. You know what I mean? Because that's the majority of the way a thing is gonna get served to people. Let's listen to this. Yes, the big reverb wave ending when we really don't know how to end the track, but we really want it to end and we don't want it to not end on something that ends it. I'm quite familiar. Also, damn, this is awesome. This is like a Philip Glass made drum and bass, and like I dig a hell of it a lot. And I was gonna talk about Tenet, and either the last track or the previous track. I was gonna talk about a way to consider how you have to write songs, because a lot about like that detail on detail shtick I was mentioning is easier said than done. Obviously, like sure, add more stuff that happens to fit and make your song sound better. Why didn't I think of that? No, it's about knowing what's coming up enough well enough that you can build up to it well enough. And that involves either beginning at a sort of central point or knowing enough what you're going to do that you can prepare for it. Like they say in Tenet, you have to have dropped it. You have to have known what you were going to do in order for the intro to zoop up into it seemingly from like the future. Like that's like I make the joke about intros and like precognitive progression where like little bits of cool foreshadowing about what's going to happen in the drop exist in else bits, and that's what primarily signifies a track as being a good one. That's a merged experience and not a kind of just slapdash to halved thing, unless you're just trying to do that. And that is really hard to do chronologically, to just start at the beginning and write and make and do and get to the rise. Like you can make an intro, but what's really hard is making an intro that gets to a drop, because you haven't dropped it yet. So why would there be an intro that gets to there? And that's why I keep suggesting to write the thing. I have no idea how you wrote this, but like for all I knew, the progressive building worked just fine on this. That actually tends to work better, actually, when you are making more progressive elements. But also, this could have been very well planned out for all I know. And honestly, the Tenet thing had nothing to do with this. It just reminded me of the music that tends to be in Christopher Nolan movies. Anyway, excellent work. Strange sub choicing, honestly, but it was mixed intelligently, so I can't really fault it. Oh, I did want to point out, speaking of intelligent mixing, this. Awesome, right? This is a really good example of doing this. This isn't metal, so it's not completely comparable, but I do want to bring this up from our discussion from Burn earlier. This is what it looks like when the elements are not overcompressed, when the things are timed properly and just so that they don't, I mean, they do overlap a little bit, but they don't overlap in a way that feels wrong or too much or too long. And really, you probably already put together just by looking at it what you have to do to get to do this right, which is just to treat toms like they're little kicks. Start sidechaining stuff, but start doing that frequency specific thing, like time them and level them right to be that way, and pan them in, of course, if you're gonna try and be real about it. But that, in order to get them to cut like that, a kick or a snare, you just gotta make them a kick or a snare. And pro tip, you can synthesize them just about as well as you can those two other things, and basically the same way. Yeah, good round, you guys. You guys come up with really cool stuff. Feel free as well, if you're watching this, to send me new and busted things where you have no idea what you're doing or why you did what you did, and you just want random help. Part of the fun of the old days was getting some of those like first attempt tracks of like aimless direction and being like, yay, okay, you should try some things out, and that kind of thing. It was also fun, definitely, to get to the random endurance test, let's put it that way. But yeah, feel free to send me stuff, guys. If you have any questions about this, please let me know. Don't forget to like, comment, and subscribe, and all that fun stuff. And as usual, have a nice day.